Recording in progress.
Off the roundabout and going to Charlotte.
Yeah, and I knew exactly. I've been talking to my son about how around Meadowlark and back, and then to go.
I usually come out the back of the neighborhood and come up. What was that called?
There's something going on
Back there.
on down Marvin Road. Yeah, the sheriff, I saw exactly.
Uh-oh, I got my mic on.
It's pulled up, so. All right, I'm going to call the Marvin Planning Board meeting of October 15th, 2024 to order. Imagine a gavel. We don't have anyone on remote participation? No. Okay. Then if we could get a motion to adopt the agenda, or unless anyone has any other changes, additions?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And adoption of the previous minutes. Anyone have any questions, changes, comments about the minutes from? And then if someone would like to make a motion?
Make a motion to adopt the previous meeting minutes as submitted.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor? Aye. Is that, well, that was only 2 people, 3 people. Yeah, I know, you don't, you don't have to vote.
I second.
Oh, that's true, okay. All right, so no public comment? No one is here, no public, no comment. Woo-hoo. No woman, no cry. All right, so the first item on our items of discussion is adoption of the 2025 meeting schedule.
Okay, so you guys have this in your packets. Really no changes from last year. It's the 3rd Tuesday every month for meetings, and we will match that for the Board of Adjustment meetings. They'll run concurrently. Only change is that that I'm asking you all to merge your joint meeting with council with your regular meeting. That basically reduces your meetings by 1 next year, so I think we all like 1 fewer meeting. We'll just prepare adequately for that meeting so the agenda's not long. Anybody have any issues with the dates? Do we need to change anything?
I have a new laptop, so I can't get online. I'm trying to find where's the password? Are we Guest Network?
Yes, 2021.
It's a guest, and the password is Marvin NC, all lowercase.
I already had Scribe pulled up, but no Wi-Fi. Okay, all right, does anyone have any issues with the dates for the meeting, the proposed meeting schedule? So Ken's not here tonight?
He's out of town.
Okay. All right, well, if no one has any questions, changes, I'll make a motion to approve. How about that?
There you go.
All right. You can second that. All right, all in favor? Aye. All right, so moved. All right, put it in your calendars, kids. And discussion and recommendation of development agreement for CZ 2024-1.
Okay, so this is, if you guys recall, you guys did make a recommendation at the previous meeting to recommend approval to the Village Council of the rezoning application for Marvin Grove. The development agreement, I should have had you guys make a recommendation for the development agreement at that time too, just because that's what the MDO states, so this is kind of just a formality. But kind of going high level into the development agreement, this is a more final draft compared to what was in your packets last month. The biggest changes regarding the village parcel in the previous development agreement draft, the rough half acre parcel that was looking at for parking, the developer had in the development agreement for it to be conveyed to them. Council has decided not to sell or convey that property, so the property would remain the village's. So the language in there now refers to that the developer and the village will continue working on potential alternatives or working to have that developed as a parking lot, but doesn't necessarily put it in finite, and that's just because that is separate from the rezoning.
Sorry, can I ask a question? So do they have some sort of understanding or agreement that the parking lot will, that small parcel will be used for parking? I mean, I know they're saying we're not going to sell it or lease it, but do they want to develop it for parking?
It's not that they don't want to develop it for the parking. I think that's where the misunderstanding of that kind of came up, was that the vision of that being a public parking lot. I think everybody's in agreement that that would be a good fit for that property, for the shared use of the Village Hall Park, access to the Marvin Loop, as well as for that commercial development and future other Heritage District developments. The issue is in how do we get there and who develops it and that. And so our attorney and myself met with the attorneys for ZEPSA last week to kind of go over this development agreement, and we didn't want to, since this is a formal agreement, we put that language in there where we'll continue working on it, but it separates it out from the rezoning. So those, like I said, it's conceptual, those conversations still being had, and what I mean by that, like the meat of who's paying for it, how it's done, how it's accessed, all that is, stuff that we'll be working on after the fact. However, the village will retain ownership of that property. So there's been some conceptual ideas of potential looking at access from the roundabout or Newtown Road compared to directly through their development, maybe have like a ride-in into the parking lot. Once again, it's all conceptual. There's grade, engineering, and other stuff that has to be done out there. And so that's where, as the, depending on council's decision for the rezoning, which the public hearing will be in November, then if it's approved, then we will continue working with them on trying to look at either doing some type of supplemental agreement of cost share or however that's done. Ideally, to save cost, yes, it would be great if it's all done in one fell swoop, just because equipment will already be on the site for grading on top of their grading that they have to do for stormwater conveyance and all that. If we can go ahead and kind of get a more formal conceptual layout done, then they can go ahead and at least build their site to line up with however the village decides to move forward with developing that for parking.
So when you said that there would be potentially shared costs, and again, because right now Vespa and the Village of Marvin would be the ones that would be splitting it, is there a way potentially in the future that we levy some type of a fee to other businesses that might develop along the Marvin Heritage District to recoup some of that?
Not directly. If a adjoining property goes through the rezoning process, and I'm gonna pick on Fincher's property because it's the most familiar one that people that are familiar with, it could be something where they could agree to potentially pay into it. We cannot force them. We can't do any type of impact fee or direct fee.
Right.
However, if they offer and council wants to consider that as part of the rezoning, that's completely within their nature. And it could be even then, depending on timing of other rezoning submittals, that it could be incorporated into where they develop it. Like instead of ZEPs, like once again, we retain the land, but it would just have to, we'd have to work out, obviously, cross-access easement agreements, because it would probably have to be exited through Marvin Grove. I don't foresee any way where you're going to have a fourth leg off the roundabout, per se, that's going to have a right-in, right-out, or some type of access where you can enter and exit the parking lot. I'm not an engineer, I'm not an expert on that, but just based off of grade, churn movement, and all that stuff, you're then shrinking that. So if you only have maybe an ingress, and then the egress would be through Marvin Grove, then that would maybe make a little bit more sense. So that's like one concept that we're exploring further.
I mean, the other thing is if other properties wanted to tap into that, if it were developed for parking, we would just have to make sure it wasn't being, like if they paid into it in order to get access to that, to get their rezoning, to expand their parking availability, their parking
Right, right.
access. We would need some sort of formula to,
Right, what would you pay into it, right?
well, but
Well-
also
Again,
like,
'cause you're going through Marvin Grove, so that's.
everyone can't pay into it, and then, you know what I mean? And that can count for part of their parking, because so many different people.
Well, the overall intent and how, like I said, how this conversation started is originally is it just being a public parking lot for a lot of different reasons. It just happens that, yes, this does abut Marvin Grove, and then that developer made the request. However, like I said, it's not off the table that it's not going to be developed for parking. Council's thrown this around in previous retreats and stuff. I know that when we were talking with the Village Hall Park, that kind of came up, and that's kind of how this conversation really came to be. just because we do have that tract of land, we have the part of grant for the park, and so, you know, we're not using that property, and it's not really buildable for any type of structure.
And there's those power lines, like, I'm sorry.
Correct, so, you know,
What, who wants to play in a park with power lines running over it?
it's one of these things, yeah, like, I can't say for certain that it's going to be a parking lot, and I can't say for certain if it's not. It's just kind of one of these things where we do have an opportunity at hand maybe to work on trying to, where the village does not bear that sole cost. And that's kind of the biggest thing, because I think if the village was looking at it to do it on its own, regardless if this development was even a thing, there would be a lot of engineering that would have to go into it. So with that being said, now that this is going on, like, that's where we would at least want to coordinate kind of that long-term plan for that parcel, where whatever they do, you know, once again, if approved and move forward in their construction documents, it lines up where it doesn't hinder that to not be developed for future parking.
Yeah, I think we'd almost get, you know, some return, because if we tried to do it ourselves, I don't know that you could get in and out, like you said. It'd be, not only be virtually impossible to get DOT to agree with it, it would eat up so much land
Yeah.
out of a very small parcel already. It would just make it unusable.
So, like I said, we're going to continue working, but we, you know, after council, you know, made the decision not to sell or deed the property, not having to go through that process, we still wanted to continue working on having that as an option, and that's why the language reads in the development agreement it does, where we'll continue to work with the developer, as well as, I mean, just any future development to once again try to potentially have that as parking or some type of usable, once again, because it does benefit having a potential parking lot for Trailhead for or for the Marvin Loop, for the Greenway, for additional parking for Village Hall, the park, all that stuff in the future.
So with that still being a big question mark, and with many of us having concerns over the lack of parking for this particular rezoning,
In your guys'
where does that leave us?
So once again, in your guys' recommendation, it was recommended that with that parking. However, that's up to council. Like I said, we have beat the parking thing over and over again.
The parking.
In short, you know, there's other, if you read the development agreement, there's language in here too that obviously the developer reserves the right to develop the site with less buildings or less square footage. And with their phasing plan, once again, it doesn't make any sense for them to do the first 3 buildings, and then if their parking lot's full, then to go ahead and build 2 more. It just might be where the site is what it is, and that's why it's phased out that way. So it's one of these things where they're not building all the buildings at once. That's never been the intent, and so I don't foresee it being feasible for them if they're already having a parking issue with only half of the buildings. But the parking lot and all that stuff will be part of the initial development. So it's not like they're only developing track 1A and then, you know, track 1B additionally. Like, all the parking and infrastructure will be in. It's just the buildings that will be built as part of the phasing plan. So I think that in somewhat protects itself. And, you know, that's something that planning board can kind of consider looking at doing a text amendment for the Heritage District regarding parking. I'm not opposed. Like I said, there's different methods on what the best practice is on that. And it just kind of, what's hard about this district compared to when you look at it in other zoning ordinances with, you know, that maybe has a Main Street district or something, like some of it's already there, or they already kind of have the buildings there, and so parking kind of regulates itself. This one with us, you know, this being piecemealed and going through rezoning processes and relying on property owners or developers that are purchasing that property, it is still, you know, a big what if, because the intent for the Heritage District is to have shared parking where you're not having big parking lots that have too much parking, and then, you know, it's utilized and be able to access through multiple developments. So.
So, different subject, unless anyone wants to keep going on parking. I noticed that the amplified music sound, page, it looks like it's page 11, J. There's no, I mean, it gives like, you know, the time restrictions and everything, but there's no, and I know we kind of brought this up at a previous meeting, but there's no reference to an ordinance. So it's like, I know amplified sound could be a rock concert, do you know what I mean? Like there's no.
So it's covered under Article 4.10, where it talks about generally applicable approvals. It basically still states that this development still has to comply with other provisions of the Code of Ordinances, i.e. the noise ordinance.
Okay, sorry, yeah. So some of the other items said, you know, had ordinances that were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That
this
one,
isn't,
without.
so this is one we went back and forth on the first development agreement, but it's basically cut and paste from the mold, is that the hours during the week end at 10 PM. You got, technically our noise ordinance ends at 9 PM. However, our noise ordinance still applies. So meaning if they have the amplified sound and it's a violation of our noise ordinance, that's a violation in general. All this is doing is all because they might have amplified sound's a generic term, and they could have, you know, an acoustic guitar with a single amp, have that playing until 10 o'clock on a weekday, but it not actually be a violation of the noise ordinance. So the noise ordinance still protects that amplified sound. This just kind of clearly outlines the times further.
Okay.
With that being said, really the only other two biggest things in this development agreement that has changed is, one, I know that this came up regarding the old Crane store in the track 2. We will be adding the current elevations. I know like the building's dilapidated, but as part of it with the exhibit, meaning that that's once again kind of locking in where you can't have a pink building, or they can't formally change like something major without going through the amendment process on this. The other thing too is the permitted uses for track 2. In the development agreement, the track 1A and B are allowed all uses outside of, we did a list of prohibited uses, basically all residential uses and stuff like that. However, track 2 would also be subject to that. I have a recommended list of about 14 uses that I think is the highest and best uses for that building. And I'll go through those, but that's going to be then added to this, basically specifically permitted uses for track 2. This is similar how we did it for Marvin Gardens, but those uses are basically bakery, bookstore, cafe, florist, gift card shop, gift or card shop, grocery store, hardware store, jewelry store, museum, pet supply store, stationery store, sporting goods store, convenience store without gas pumps, and drugstore, pharmacy, no drive-through. We're
Wait,
trying to,
What was the last thing you said?
the last one was
Pharmacy?
drugstore/pharmacy with no drive-through.
Well, with no drive-through, okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
The building's already limited. It can't really be expanded. So certain uses like restaurant, I mean, we could allow, but at the same time, the odds of them doing a, commercial kitchen for a true restaurant that's not like a low impact like deli or cafe type is unlikely. The only one that I have question marked is all the office uses allowed in the Heritage District. It's one where I'm 50-50 on a recommendation on, because I don't think an office use is the vision for that building. And so that's why I've limited to kind of those low impact kind of commercial uses. And so if planning board is good with that, that's what I'm going to add in and send back to the trust for their acceptance.
So like ice cream parlor would fall into the same kind of categories like coffee shop?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It doesn't have to be specifically named.
And like I said, I might add restaurant just because of that reason to cover it, but, actually having a true sit-down like restaurant, like, what the old house is being renovated into is unlikely, because they're not gonna have the space to do a full renovation for that, so.
I've got, I guess, a memory question. It's more than anything else. Way back when we were working on Heritage District and stuff, and, lots of conversations about mattress stores and, and chain stores and all this stuff. And we said, well, it's going to be a conditional use, so they're going to have to submit who all the tenants were going to be. And if they change tenants, and I'm taking, like I said, memory, that sort of went away with those approved use tables.
Correct. When we adopted the MDO, we expanded the permitted uses, which is good because it clearly identifies it a whole lot better. For example, in the form-based code, I think it just said office use. It's a very, very broad term. Now we get into the specific office uses, and same thing with retail uses. Like, there's other retail uses that I have on my maybe list, like apparel sales or art, like beauty shop, like bike shop. Like, yeah, it doesn't hurt maybe to also include those, but I don't think that's formally, like I said, the highest and best use and the vision for that existing building. I think, you know, when the Heritage District was being created and kind of also focused around that building to an extent, it was, you know, always visioned as a general store or a cafe, coffee shop. And so that's what I've tried to narrow down. And it's not that they can't come back and ask for an amendment if, you know, if this gets approved that way. It's just, that's what staff's recommendation is, because, you know, we could just keep them in the same track as 1A and 1B, and the property's gonna regulate itself, meaning that the building exists. They can't demolish the building unless they come back through the amendment process. Even if they got approval to do that, your building footprint is still limited based off of the site plan. So it's still going to regulate heavily the uses, even though it's permitted, it's not practical. So that's why I tried to narrow down what I did, because that's what I envisioned could be utilized in that space.
I mean, it's a very forward-facing, I mean, it's, you know, a lot of eyes are on that little house, and it could be a draw for a Snooze Fest, so. Are they gonna be okay with that?
I'm gonna send it to the, I know about 99% sure, and Peter's on the call, that he's probably good with that. I think, like I said, it was just kind of one of these conversations, do we want to allow all permitted, like the same uses as track 1A and 1B, which, you know, it can go, like I said, go one of both ways, but the conditional zoning process, you're supposed to have a vision, you know, and Peter and his team, they have a vision for their site. The historic trust people, I mean, that property is included in this rezoning, however, their vision's not as concrete. And so,
Well, don't they have like multiple owners as well, or like multiple parties that are?
yeah,
Is it a trust?
it's in a trust. I don't know how many people are actually involved. I want to say like maybe 3.
Oh, I thought it
4.
would be more than that.
Could be, but with that being said, like, you know, this kind of helps solidify that, since it's not really as clear for the development agreement, that would allow for them to come back and amend their portion of the development agreement and site plan, but would have to go through the same process again. So it's not kind of giving them a blank check. It's controlling that, especially since the vision's not as clear. That's the same reason why we're putting those the existing elevations in as an exhibit that kind of ties the building to not remain in its current condition, but those materials and that architectural feel of that building is supposed to kind of, the intent to remain the same.
Last question from me, sorry, I know I ask a lot of questions, but does parking, depending on what the use is for the Crane store, is parking included in the ZEPSA?
Yes, that is another reason why some of these uses were specifically chosen that way, because, for example, I mean, once again, office use, you're 9 to 5 typically, but if you're thinking about other, once again, higher impact that you're regulating. Like, I think there was one, let me think, which we already thought about a lot of that when we adopted the MDO on some of those, because I know there was some certain uses like ballet studio and certain things I think we didn't allow because of that reasoning. But there was another one that talked about like music, maybe it was music lessons and stuff. Like, once again, having a lot of like then traffic that way, that's why, once again, certain of these uses were kind of selected to, once again, still go with the overall site.
Anyone else have any questions, comments, concerns? And does someone want to make a motion? Bueller? Anyone? This would be to recommend approval of the proposed development agreement for CZ 2024-1 contingent upon the village attorney review and approval.
What's not complete about it?
Well, I mean, we don't have the comments from the village attorney.
We do, like, these are already incorporated in. Like, basically, the draft that is presented is based off the feedback from Chaplain and I's meeting last week. Chaplain's just doing one final review. All the exhibits is basically the rezoning submittal that you guys have already recommended approval. So like, basically, everything in this development agreement is basically just outlining what we've already recommended approval for in the,
We've seen all the exhibits before.
correct, yeah.
The only changes we have are the red line changes here, so that's
Yes, for the most part.
approving.
Well, you're still recommending the whole development agreement, yeah, just because of what the draft, the last one that was in your guys' packets, one, like I said, didn't make the motion, but two, the draft at that time was a rough draft, and we went through kind of the big changes. Overall, the development agreement's basically the same outline as what their rezoning last year was, like, it's just adding the language in there for track 2 mainly, and updating some of the terminology to be consistent with the MDO.
I see we allowed to go to 62,000.
That's, and if you see the note, and I'm glad you brought that, because I do want to clarify that for the board and anybody listening. The reason it says 62,000 is because of the way that building gross area is defined per the MDO, meaning it's exterior walls in, and that includes roof overhangs, outdoor areas, but the building footprint is still the same. The 5,000 square foot maximum is still, of a footprint, is still the same. So that's the only other change that we're waiting to get clarification from their architect and compared to our ordinance, but that's why in one section it says 47.5 or 4,700, and one says 62, because we're trying to get clarification on the terminology there. But the overall site plan, where it has those buildings locked in at that square footage, the site plan is the master plan and is an exhibit to this development agreement. So it's not allowing them to have more square footage.
Okay.
So this is the development agreement that we're doing, not the master plan.
No, the master plan was basically the rezoning submittal that you guys had recommended last week, or last month. So,
I'll go ahead and, unless there's other questions.
Is there a readout for you?
Yep.
turn your mic on.
Okey-dokey, that is on. I make a motion to recommend approval of the proposed development agreement for CZ 2024-1, contingent upon village attorney review and approval.
Do we have a second?
Second.
And all in favor? So moved. Discussion and recommendation of zoning text amendment 2024-1.
This one should be kind of quick. I left this on your guys' agenda, though, for further conversation. In short, the village has received basically, I've received a zoning permit from a resident that wanted to do a detached garage. The detached garage does encroach past the front building line of the home, so it would encroach in the front yard, which, under the old ordinance, we did allow. There were certain parameters there, like the building had to be the same look and characteristic of the primary and still had to meet the setbacks for the principal. In short, there was language in Article 9 in the MDO that basically stated that all accessory and supporting structures had to be behind the front building facade. So I spoke with Chapin on this, and that's where we kind of got to looking at a text amendment. And it's further than that because of this one individual property owner. There's a lot of detached garages in Broadmoor that are in line with the building. It doesn't encroach past, but it's in line. But if you read the language in Article,
Says behind.
correct, in Article 9 says behind, Article 8 even then has further setbacks depending on the zoning district. Spoke with Rick yesterday on this. In Article 8, in that table that is in your guys' packets, it also has parking enclosures, whether enclosed or not enclosed. His interpretation is that even though it says that in Article 9, in short, that I can issue the permit as is based off, as long as it complies with those setbacks and that, because it's a parking structure, it's a detached garage. With that being said, though, the reason, and once again, the agenda came out prior, but in short, does planning board want to look at potentially making an amendment to the MDO, for example? We would probably change that language in Article 9 where it says including detached garages to basically excluding detached garages have to be behind the principal structure. And it doesn't have to be we wouldn't make a formal recommendation. This is, like I said, mainly just discussion. Talking to Rick, which I completely agree with him, and that's why we were working through this on how to best make this text amendment, is because when you do a text amendment, it applies to the village as a whole. And I think I've mentioned this plenty of times before, but in most cases, HOAs are the saving grace there. Like, you're not gonna have somebody that's gonna put a detached garage in the front yard in certain of these neighborhoods. However, there are still properties that are in neighborhoods that don't have an active HOA or not in neighborhoods at all. And so that's where we were trying to then fine tune this text amendment to make sure no adverse impacts, if approved, happen. So that's why Rick recommended that we don't amend anything right now. Which after that conversation with him yesterday, like I said, I'm in agreement with him, this case aside, because like I said, zoning permit for this one individual property owner is fine. We just wanted to then look at, to make sure we weren't based off of allowing permits under the old ordinance for like those ones in Broadmoor, that it wasn't creating a non-conforming structure. His take is, once again, it may be non-conforming, but it's a detached garage, so it's not the end of the world compared to the primary structure being non-conforming. So, said, it's kind of open for discussion. We did some research, and all that's included in your packets. Certain ordinances do separate detached garages out from accessory structures, and then they kind of have different setbacks, which is kind of what ours does anyway through that Article 8 table. But Rick warned, just be careful, because somebody could get a permit for a detached garage and it be used for storage, not actually be used to park a car or something. So that's why his recommendation was, once again, to probably just let it be. If that makes
So what's
sense.
sorry, if someone wanted to build a garage and just store their junk in there, we don't control that. I mean, it's still, the primary use would be a garage, but what they do with it is not anything that I thought that's what Rick taught us, is that.
Correct, and that's where the art of interpretation, as he likes to explain, is with this one specific case that kind of started this text amendment. The individual property's house sits so far back on the property, and it's because of septic lines in the front that, his house his front setback's 50, or no, I think it might be zoned S42. Either way, his house sits at least 100 feet, if not further, back from edge of pavement. So the detached garage that he, submitted an application for still is roughly maybe 65, 66 feet. But it's, the back line of the garage is in line with the front of the primary facade. So its functionality on top of where the house sits on the property. There's a provision in Article 9 that talks about, in the most special circumstances, building placement can be varied if it's, due to topography and would preserve existing vegetation. Once again, if he was forced to move it in the back, it would remove a lot of trees. So, it's a clear-cut case for issuing the permit based off of interpreting the ordinance as its current standing. But it's still one of those things where, because how the old ordinance read, because I know when we did the amendments to the old ordinance for accessory structures, we did discuss this about accessory structures in the front yard, and we looked at size of property, we looked at, I mean, all those kind of variations, because there are some properties that are over 2.5, 3 acres. I mean, some of the properties are neighborhood zone rural residential where their house is far back on their property. And so that's why we, under the old ordinance, did allow it. So that's kind of what I'm getting to, is it something we want to look at and maybe only allowing in rural residential? Is it something that the board wants staff maybe to look at further? Or do we just kind of let it be until maybe it comes up again and address it at then?
What if someone, because, you know, there are some beautiful neighborhoods that actually, one of the house I remember looking at a long time ago across from Audrey Kell, and they have a little detached garage, like, in front, but like that's the style, like, you know.
Is that Ardrey? I think is the name of that community.
Not Ardrey, I lived in Ardrey, but this is like across from the baseball field. I can't remember the name of that.
Oh, the other side, okay, so
Yeah.
on the east side. Okay.
And, but that was just the style of the buildings, and I've actually seen, is it Broadmoor? I feel like Broadmoor actually has some of those as well. So it's like, sometimes it would make sense architecturally or design-wise for that to happen. You know, so I don't see it being a big deal, but just in general.
And that's where, if we do explore this text amendment, it would want to be, we want to put language in there where the accessory structure has to be basically the same look material. Because from an architectural standpoint, then yes, it does, it gives that feel of one structure. Where then you don't have, you know, maybe a nice like brick house or whatever, you know, material, and then you have this other building that sits in the front and becomes a kind of a nuisance from an eyesore, just because it's a different type.
So you maybe answered one of my questions. I was thinking, we cannot, I didn't think we could dictate look and material.
You kind of can on accessory structures, and especially under certain circumstances like this, where you put, like, the way that I was going to approach this text amendment is potentially break out detached garages separate from accessory structures, put detached garage provisions, just like accessory dwellings, in Article 10, and regulate that, you know, one of the special conditions has to be that it's got to be the same look, color, material as the primary. We do that for accessory dwellings. You can do it in certain circumstances like that, especially if you're making it, you know, additional requirements. Can't do it for the primary. Can't do it for the primary, like the actual structure of the home.
Don't feel there's going to be a frequent or common request, so.
What's the process if we don't change the, and then someone wants, yeah.
So the two options would be, if this were to come up again, one, interpreting the ordinance, and depending on, you know, once again, that's my job. Like, if this individual is literally doing the same design as his house, if there was something being proposed in the front of the house that was not the same, then I may interpret the ordinance saying that, hey, you know, this doesn't comply with Article 9. However, if still they want to go that route, one, their options are to request a text amendment. This was a staff-initiated one because, like I said, the greater discussion of Broadmoor and certain other pre-existing cases. But, you know, that would be where the applicant would file for the text amendment. We'd kind of be doing the same discussion as we are now, amend the text. But once again, text amendments apply to the village as a whole. So the other option would be potentially a variance, depending on, and this would have been a clear-cut case for a variance. Honestly, might end up mocking this for a upcoming, just like mock variance hearing for you guys for training, because of the septic place, I mean, all that stuff and the existing lot conditions. So that's kind of the two options. You know, if they were to come and want to do it here, but then could easily move it behind the home, no vegetation, no topo issue, I mean, that would be my first question to them. So it is kind of a rare case, and to your point, Mike, is that I don't know how many of these we're going to have. The only places I think where this would come up is rural residential neighborhoods or properties on SFR 1 or 2 that aren't in neighborhoods that are along major thoroughfares, Waxhaw Marvin, Marvin, and Newtown. I think that's the only other time it's gonna come up.
Or potentially if there's any ADA or other type of accessibility issues that somebody may have, and which I would, right, I wouldn't even give that a second thought, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
That'd be a variance.
and that, once again, I think that's where we've actually done a variance for this in the past. The property at the corner of Woodland Forest and Newtown, the white farm looking house, they have a garage in the front yard. Literally a very similar case to this, where their house is so far back on the existing property because I think it used to be some type of horse arena, or the previous owner apparently cut down the tree, whatever, and just buried a hole and left them. So the ground wasn't as stable, so they had to move the house back, and so that house, I mean, once again, set about 112 feet from Woodland Forest Drive. So, but we did that variance, huh? And that's fine. No. I said, after talking with Rick yesterday, I felt better. I mean, I had a draft kind of done that we were gonna kind of go into further discussion tonight. But after talking with him, I mean, he crafted the ordinance, and so if he interprets it that way, and we typically have very similar interpretation in that table in Article 8, when it talks about parking and closed structures, I didn't really think about that until like Thursday of last week. Like, it was one of those, like, wait a second, would this apply here? So, and Rick was like, yeah, it does. I'm like, all right, so.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess we're on our planners update, on your planners. Do we have to do anything here? No.
Nope. Yeah, you can, right, Austin, they can just basically,
You're not required, no one's required.
because now nothing's formally being proposed, so no motions requested. Planners update, biggest, let me think. The Marvin Loop project that the village received grant funds will have a public input meeting, open to the public here at Village Hall, I think, let me check my calendar, on November 7th, because 5th is the election day, right?
The 5th is election day.
So yeah, so November 7th here at Village Hall from 5 to 7. All adjoining property owners of that proposed routing of the trail, which is basically any properties along Newtown, Marvin, will receive a postcard, but we're gonna do a page on our website, but just want to make you guys aware, feel free to come out and learn about the project, give comment, feedback on the project. We've been working on finalizing our conceptual routing to preserve trees, to pedestrian safety, all that stuff. Fun fact, Keith came out, we looked at trees. The one actually on the Marvin Grove site, the nice big oak that they are preserving at the front of the old Crane House, it's dying.
Oh, Lord.
And Keith basically said they can take all these tree protection measures during the development, but it's already rotting from the inside, so it's only a matter of time where that tree becomes an issue. And
Safety hazard.
yeah, so
Falls across the road.
so that one will probably end up coming out. But there's other ones that, in the routing of this, that we've tried to, we've came up with some unique design. For example, like the oaks here on Village Hall, where we're not, in the construction phase, they're not excavating the soil, potentially disturbing the roots. We're potentially going to be doing some type of boardwalk where the disturbance around those trees is very limited, so they're protected. And so Keith and I basically walked the kind of the proposed route, especially from here all the way through Banks, and looked at, those trees along Newtown Road, which ones were worth keeping, which ones were, maybe not. Pretty much all of them were, except that one. So all that feedback was then submitted to the engineer. All that will then be, kind of reviewed during that public meeting. And I believe then it will go to council right after that, for them basically to approve the conceptual routing and design, and then they'll move into the construction document. So for that overall project, fingers crossed, potentially we'll be in right-of-way / looking for construction scheduling sometime this time next year, meaning that construction could be anywhere from fall, winter of 2025 to spring of '26. It's also just contingent upon, this is a federally funded grant through FWHA, DOT, with the hurricane stuff going on. I don't know if they'll try to move funding around and potentially delay the project, but we're gonna at least have the plans done. Mhm. Where's their fallen tree?
It's right after Providence, our Providence down south.
You have a great
entrance.
opportunity to have the tree people there clearing the trees for the power lines. Maybe just pick that as a focal point.
So regarding fallen trees, especially along DOT roads,
One towards Charlotte. It was on the road. Huh? Man, it's been there for a while.
so I don't know if that was, so in any of those cases, if our public works staff sometimes, even though those are DOT roads for, regarding emergency access or safety, sometimes they are the ones that clear the roads. Other times it's DOT, because it's their roads to maintain. I will say for a fact, when DOT does that, they literally will cut it to the edge of pavement, get it off the road and leave it. Then potentially it was DOT. Yeah, we can potentially put in a request, I can talk with Davey, but put in a request with DOT to potentially come and get that. But,
You should see I-26 right now. They literally like slice them, so if you go off the road at all, like, you're gonna be impaled.
yeah,
They literally just cut right to the edge.
like I said, because they're trying to make sure that the road is open, so they literally will cut it, throw it, and move on to the next site. So,
Road should also include.
yeah, just shoot me an email with the location.
I'll take a picture for you.
Okay, thank you. Yep, and then I'll get with Davey and we'll look at it.
Stay on Marvin Road. I know we only brought up last week.
Lights.
Thank you.
I was
Lighting?
gonna ask.
Any update? I know we talked about it last month. You were going to discuss with
Union Power.
about the lights on Marvin Road
Yes, I will do that
last month. You want me to cut
this
you
month.
another email?
No, I'll make a note.
I was thinking about that when I was coming home the other night.
Yeah, especially with winter coming. Winter's coming.
Winter's coming. Anything else, Hunter or Austin, before we get to review Hunter's action items?
I got nothing.
I'm good.
All right. I don't think we have any action items. So board member comments. So before we go around the table, I just want to officially welcome Angel. Welcome to the planning board. It's so exciting. And Mr. Marklees, why don't we start with you, please?
Yeah, excuse me, also welcome, and long ago, maybe the first time I ever met you, we were talking about getting involved in some sort of committee or group. You'd be amazed how much you truly learn about the village that you don't know otherwise. So, welcome.
Angel, welcome. Staff, thank you very much for your work.
Dane, welcome aboard. I look forward to working with you. Staff, thank you, as always.
Angel, it's your turn.
One quick note from me, if you haven't already given me your emergency contact form, please fill that out before you leave the building. Otherwise, I will follow you to your car. And welcome, Angel.
All right. Can I get a motion to adjourn our meeting? And a second?
Second,
All in favor?
aye, Moncur.
All right, we're adjourned.